Can you hear me? I'm not cut out to become a YouTuber, I think. I don't think anybody else is coming, so we can have a nice little chat together. It seems there are some people finding their way to this live stream. There are 4 people, I think. One of them is me. If you could just drop a line in the chat that you are there, and I have some idea who is there. Now we're back down to 3, so it's not going too well. Alberto, are you there? Okay. Is Robert there as well? It's a bit of a mess. Hi, Keys. Hello, Miles. Do I can read some. Let's see. I got plenty of Heidegger. Heidegger. It's the thing. Okay, we can also start with the questions. Reading aus der Erfahrung des Denkens is not so easy without having a look at the text at the same time. So, Alberto, you have a question? You can do it. It's 8 people now, so you can start doing this. If you type it in the chat, then I will read it out loud, and then I'll try to give an answer to it. Or anybody else. Are you getting a double speaking? Everybody else as well? Otherwise, I'll try with the mic. The sound is fine in England. So then it must be something else. So, but if you want, you can. I don't know if it's a long question. Maybe you need 5 minutes to type it. Repeated overlapping. Let's see if it works. Okay. Well, we have the first question as well. But first, I'll say a few words about the film we'll be watching later. Basically, it's an attempt to clarify a little bit Heidegger's relation to his hometown, Meßkirch, and his notion of Heimat that's connected to it. So part of the film shows Heidegger in Meßkirch and gives you an impression also of the town, and some of the text he wrote that are clearly connected to Meßkirch, like the Veldweg, the country pass, and of the mystery of the bell tower from Geheimnis des Glockenturms. At the same time, we incorporated sections of Richard Wieser's television interview with Heidegger in 1969 in honor of his 80th birthday. And that's the second thing we tried to do in the movie, is give an introduction to Heidegger's thinking. And the way he talks about his philosophy in that television interview is accessible. And of course, we also elaborate a little bit on it. So if you have never been to Meßkirch, it's nice to have a chance to see Meßkirch. And if you've been there, it might have been a while, so then it's also nice to get some of the images back. So we'll be doing that later. You're all invited to join on Zoom. I will put up the link in a minute, or I can find it now. I sent the Zoom link. I shouldn't be doing two things at the same time. I'll get the link later. I'll start with the question of Ricky Phillips. And he's asking, what is the biggest problem that Heidegger has with Kant's metaphysics? It's, of course, a question that's not so easy to answer, because Heidegger has worked on Kant extensively, and not only written his famous book, Kant and the Problem of Metaphysics, but also dedicated several lecture courses to Kant thinking. I don't think that Heidegger has a problem with Kant's metaphysics as such. For Heidegger, is one of the main philosophers in the history of metaphysics. And there is a before Kant and an after Kant in Heidegger's view. But of course, Kant was, like Heidegger himself, limited by the thrownness of his own life. So in his interpretation of the schematism of the understanding, Kant got very close to identifying the transcendental perception with temporality, but it was something he could not accept, and he just kind of pulled away from the step. He didn't take the step that Heidegger would take when he was interpreting Kant. So that would be kind of an answer to it. And if what somebody's pointing out in the chat, that you're wondering about Kant and the problem of metaphysics, or the problem of metaphysics is basically how to develop a metaphysics of metaphysics. And Kant never succeeded in doing that. And for Heidegger, the only way to ground metaphysics is in an analytic of Dasein. So it's only through an understanding of the existential structure of a human being that you can find the possibility of grounding metaphysics. If that answers your question. If somebody else has a question, please feel free to type it in the chat. Otherwise, I don't know. Okay. Louise has another question. If Hegel and later Nietzsche culminated Western metaphysics, what was Kant's role or position in Heidegger's view? Kant was already starting to work on the notion of systematic philosophy, but he didn't arrive at establishing a system in the sense that Hegel did. So it's basically what you could say is that Kant starts from the basic question: how is natural science possible? So how is physics possible? And he then develops a theory that physics is only possible because we have intuition and understanding working together. So we can only have knowledge of things that present themselves to us as an object of experience. And experience has this double structure. On the one hand, it's based on the on sense perception and everything that's given within the time and space. And on the other hand, we have the understanding, ordering, this manifold collection of impressions that we have through a categorical determination. But of course, the main problem remains with Kant, that you get the division between the thing in itself, as he calls it, which is outside of our experience, and the objects as which the thing in itself is given within experience. So that means, for one thing, that there is no knowledge possible of God, because God can never be given within space and time. But you can still talk about God, of course, since he's an idea of pure reason. That's a point where basically the problem starts for Hegel. Hegel is not satisfied with the answer that there is a thing in itself. Because if we can know nothing about the thing in itself, then we don't need it. So Hegel is is basically trying to think all forms of possible thinking and systemizing them. And he starts with logic. And in logic, he starts with the most basic concept and the most I lost my train of thought. I was looking at the chat at the same time. Shouldn't be doing that. So basically, it's an attempt to think through from being as the most general and emptiest of all concepts through dialectical movement. Develop a whole system of categories, and if you've developed a whole system of categories, then you have all possible ways of coming to knowledge brought into one system. So Kant is basically, you could say, the Janus figure who's changing modern metaphysics as it was started with Descartes, and is the starting point of German idealism, and opens up this whole new way of thinking that Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel developed. I think I'll leave it at that, and I'll move on to Francisco Parra. So, he says, where does the concept of Lichtung comes from? I understand its meaning, but I read once it has a relationship with the Black Forest. I read it in Crossman. Crossman wrote a book, The Existence of the World. Well, the notion of clearing, you find it already in being and time. And clearing is then understood by Heidegger also in relation to lumen naturale, that the human being is the entity or the being that understands the world, and in this sense brings light into the world. So, but the original meaning of Lichtung has little to do with light, because it's in a forest, and it doesn't have to be the Black Forest. It's the same in the forest next to Meßkirch. When the woodcutters are felling trees, they take the trees out, and that creates an open space within the forest. And there is, of course, a path, because you can't get the trees out if there's no path. And that's where Heidegger got this notion from. The Lichtung is this clearing in the sense of this open space into which light can fall. So it has nothing to do with, in the most immediate sense, with light. And it's you find it also in this notion of a Holzweg. Basically, a Holzweg is one of those passes in the forest that leads to the clearing where the trees have been taken away. So there's an open space. And that's what Heidegger is trying to do in most of his later lectures and texts. He's trying to take his readers or audience with him on a path of thinking, or a Holzweg that will lead to a clearing where we can understand something about a fundamental metaphysical position, whether that be Aristotle or Descartes or Hegel. Doesn't matter, but it opens up this possibility of letting light shine on something. And then we have Louise asking, would you say that the Lichtungsuse of light is used by Heidegger as a purposeful opposition to Enlightenment uses of light? I think it's in English you see it more closely, because in Enlightenment you have the word light, but in Aufklärung there's no light, I think. So the Lichtung, Louise is saying, well, she's not talking about the Lichtung versus the light of reason. The Lichtung is not, you cannot compare it to the light of reason, I think, because the Lichtung is a condition of possibility. It's an openness, and this openness is basically opened up through understanding. So it's not similar to the light of reason. I would say the light of reason is what in Heidegger is his understanding of verstehen. So verstehen is neither reason nor understanding in the sense of verstand. I don't think Heidegger is trying too much to think against the light of reason or against the Enlightenment. He's more or less going his own path of thinking, I would say. I don't know who Lex is, but connect Francesco Parra is asking. No, just a sec. I'll go over the question. So, Francisco's asking how I would connect Lichtung to Ereignis. And then there's a couple of questions by Akaki Verikanti that I will deal with afterwards. And there's Miles is asking also about the clearing, and he's asking what the importance of such a clearing is and to what use it is put. So Ereignis and Lichtung, I would say that it's the Ereignis is also the coming about of the Lichtung. And then you can basically, I think you can use Lichtung and unconcealment as yes. If you can block them, feel free to do so. Or maybe I need to figure out how to to block people. Is it here somewhere? Participants. Yeah. So in Ereignis, you could say that being comes into its own. Ereigner has this middle. The next bit, Ereignis, is you can relate to the verb ereigner. So it's both the happening of something, and in this happening, something is brought into its own. And what is brought into its own is both being and Dasein. And this openness that is created, into which Dasein stands out, can also be thought of as a Lichtung. So it's, I think the main idea that Heidegger has, and of course he's using formal indications, and that's why you can play with them. You don't have to do definitions of Lichtung and Ereignis, etc., because it's more playful in my opinion, and that also allows you to try different ways of understanding it. And the basic idea of Heidegger is that we always need this openness, which he calls in being in time, it's being in the world. And which he later uses, for example, also the notion of the between that opens up. It's like the chaos opening up and separating, and without not separating is not the right word. It's the opening up of being and Dasein, which also opens up in an openness. Kan je moeders van dat ding aftrekken? And it's Francisco Parra asking, it's the distance itself. Yeah, you need this moment of openness for the possibility of anything being given. I think if you go and try to do it from that direction, it's maybe easier. Heidegger's main idea is that it gives something. What it gives in the most simple form is the understanding of being. And being in time is, you could call it an attempt to lay bare the conditions of possibility of our understanding of being, which is normally vague, and we often forget about being, hence the notion of the forgetfulness of being. But it's so if there is something given, there must be a space and openness into which it can be given. And this is the part that in metaphysics is overlooked. Metaphysics is concentrating on all that it gives, or all the entities within the world, I could say. And Heidegger's point is that if we only look at the entities, we don't see the openness, which is the condition of possibility of it being given at all. And that's where he is struggling both with language and to make that clearer. I think it's the basic point of his philosophy, and it's the basic point that enables him to have a full-scale interpretation of the history of philosophy as metaphysics. We can show how these things play out. Well, I'll go back to Akaki first, and then I'll go to the openness. And so Akaki says it's easy if people are looking at this later. I'm not sure they can see the chat. So he says, Professor Herman died recently, engaged in close reading of Heidegger his whole life. A Heidegger expert, for sure. What characterizes his reading? Is it the basics? Does it have a meaning for future? What must be a main concern for future reading? Well, it's a nice collection of questions, and I think you have always to recognize, I think, the work somebody has done. You may disagree about the content here and there, but of course, Professor von Herman is spent basically most of his life editing and interpreting Heidegger. And he did it for many, many years. And he had a lot of students, especially also from countries abroad, from the US to Japan, basically, and everything in between. So he has had a big influence on Heidegger studies, I think, and Heidegger research. And it's something we should be grateful for. And I think in his interpretation, that's where I differ with him, is he's trying to bring out the true Heidegger. It's sort of, you find it also in this title of the last book he published with Alfieri, The Truths About the Black Notebooks. So he's in, as far as I've met him several times, so I know him a little bit. He's always trying to come to the one true interpretation of Heidegger. And as is often the case, that interpretation is, of course, his own. And he has very little patience with anybody who's doing a different kind of reading of Heidegger than he's doing, which is both a disadvantage and an advantage. The advantage is that you get a kind of, you can create a kind of school. So I think a lot of the people who did their dissertation under von Herman have similarities in the way they think about Heidegger and the way they interpret Heidegger. At the same time, if you become exclusive and say, well, I'm the one who knows, then I think you make discussion basically impossible. And that's one of the things that was very hard with him to get in any kind of discussion about Heidegger's work, because he's always convinced he has the truth, and what you say must be wrong for that reason. So what I would like to take maybe from von Herman is the seriousness with which he pursued his Heidegger studies. And I think main concern for future Heidegger reading or for Heidegger studies is to open it up more. I think there are two ways of doing it. One is just to admit the fact that students nowadays are very different from the students that von Herman may have had in the 70s and 80s of the last century. He is the young people nowadays, and I'm old enough to call them young. They have different ways of communicating through the internet, basically the use of cell phones, the way you gather information, the way you read text. We used to, when I was younger, you could only talk to each other. Talking by telephone was pretty expensive, and so I think one of the things that are reasons for questioning. So I think you have two ways of looking at it. At the one hand, you have a generation of students for whom it's not a natural thing to read a book that has 400 pages, and to have the concentration to go through the whole development of ideas, either in Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, or Hegel's Phenomenology, or in Heidegger's Being and Time. So there you need, if you want to teach people, you need to adapt to what they know and the way they function, basically. And I think there is a lot of room for trying out new things. And the other thing is that you can also use these new possibilities of the internet. I think in Heidegger's case, it would be very interesting to use it. For example, when the Gesamtausgabe is finished, and it's almost finished now, there will still be some 20,000 notes of Heidegger that you find also in a lot of these published lecture courses, where in the appendix they have notes that Heidegger wrote and kept with the manuscript of his lecture course. Now, one of the things you can do with these notes is not to make a selection, as Ulf Heidegger is planning as the executor of the literary estate, to do a 2 or 3 volume selection and publish that as an appendix to the Gesamtausgabe. I think you should make all the notes available. And you can do this by scanning them and putting them on the internet. And the second step would be to have a transcription of all the notes. But if you do it on the internet, then people can do transcriptions, and others can see if they can find words that people can't read, or they can find corrections. And it would also open up the possibility of starting to play with these notes and see if you can date them. It's one way of getting some kind of structure to them, giving some kind of structure to them. Or you could also try to find notes that may be connected or may be a part of a bigger text. I think in that direction, there would be a lot of interesting things you could do. And I think so. I think we should always respect someone like von Herman, and also accept his limitations. I think everybody has his limitations, and so that's basically my thought on von Herman and the way he's been reading and working with Heidegger. And then I'll go to the next question. Dasein needs this openness needs Dasein. And what about this? What about this complementarity? So that's one of it's a big question in Heidegger. You could say that, I would say that for Heidegger, being, and then the being with the famous why. So this, how can I put it? I think for Heidegger, or in Heidegger, you have the being with the why, and you have the being with the I. The being with the I is how the being with the why was understood in the history of metaphysics. And to put it simple, is beingness. And then you have these questions that is then later tied back to the entity that is in the fullest and the highest way. Normally, that's God. So metaphysics is ontotheology for Heidegger, to put it very simple. It is being with the the why shows itself as being with the I in the history of metaphysics, but at the same time keeps itself back insofar as it is not just the being with the I. And there are two ways where you can see it. One is according to Heidegger in early Greek thinking, so Parmenides, Anaximander, Heraclitus, he talks about the most. And that's before the beginning of metaphysics in Plato and Aristotle. So that's one, there's an understanding of being with the why that is not yet metaphysical. So that's what Heidegger tries to get at, and that's why he makes all these endless interpretations of fragments of the pre-Socratic thinkers. The other way is where this being lights up with the why is in the poetry of Hölderlin. There it's something that is no longer being with the I as beingness. So this being with the why, and he uses the word he uses is the oldest fragment of philosophy, and he translates it as Brauch. Well, Brauch in German comes from brauchen, and brauchen is needing. So being braucht, human being or Dasein. And at the same time, in this notion of Brauch, it's not just that it needs, but also it makes use of Dasein. So, and we, since we have always this vague understanding of being as Dasein, are of course attuned to the address of being, be it as being with the I through metaphysics or the being with the why in early Greek thinking or in poetry. That would be my answer to that question. Then we get to I'll do Akaki's second question first. He asked me if Heidegger himself would adapt. I think it's a good question. Probably Heidegger himself adapted also to his new audience after the end of the Second World War, and he basically, after the interdiction to teach at the university, and he did this couple of lecture courses in the early 50s, he found a new audience. It was no longer an academic audience, but was made up of Leute that were well educated and had some money in Germany. But they were not neither philosophy students nor professional philosophers. So where you could, at university, you can expect a certain level of knowledge from your students if they're in a certain, in the first, second, third, sixth, seventh semester, that you can't expect in an audience of ordinary people, gebildete Publikum, you would say in German. So there Heidegger adapted his own style. I think that's one of the reasons why these texts read very differently from earlier lectures that Heidegger gave in the early 20s, like The Concept of Time, for example, which was addressed to, in that case, to students and professors of theology. So I think you could have made it, and I haven't. Maybe I can just a little anecdote. As some of you may know, I did an edition. The edition of the most of the text that Heidegger published with Meßkirch, with the exception of the famous 2-volume Nietzsche set. And when I first had the idea to do it, because I found basically the way they were still being published as a reprint impossible. The pages were getting gray, so not black print but gray print, and I think it's not a way to present Heidegger's work to the world. So at the beginning, Hermann Heidegger didn't like the idea, was against it, and but it took time and discussions, and in the end he agreed, and he also agreed to do ebooks. So I think that's one of the ways of adapting to the adapting Heidegger and making him accessible. I think it's a task. And the task is not just doing interpretations of Heidegger, but also through the presentation of the text and the possibilities that we now have. We should make use of them to present Heidegger in different ways or in more accessible ways to young people. And I think Heidegger would probably be willing to adapt himself in that sense. We'll see if, well, first to Luis and then Francisco, and then, so Luis is asking how close were von Hermann's and Hermann Heidegger's understanding of Heidegger. Did they read Heidegger with one mind? Well, the simple answer is no. First of all, Hermann Heidegger always said that he didn't understand his father's work. Well, that is the last thing that von Hermann would say about himself. So I think there's the basic difference. And well, the disadvantage of saying that you don't know your father's work is that you can only rely on the famous "my father told me" line. As if Hermann Heidegger would be talking to people like Gadamer or Puckler, who were famous philosophers in their own right, and had a lot of experience in editing philosophical text. He could, of course, not discuss with them on the same level. But as the son of Heidegger, he could always say, you may be absolutely right, Professor Kahnemer, or Professor Puckler, or whoever von Hermann, but my father told me he wanted it to be done this or that way. And that's the end of the discussion. And of course, von Hermann and Hermann Heidegger were not the biggest friends. I think for the last 10, 15 years, when they drove together to Marbach to work in the Deutsche Literatur-Archiv on the manuscripts of Heidegger, they wouldn't say a word to each other. It's about a 3-hour drive. So it gives you some idea of duty before pleasure that they put up with each other. Francesco is asking, do you know Jean-Luc Mayon's reading of Heidegger, especially the idea of ontological reduction, a step towards donation? To be honest, I don't know it well, so I'm not going to interpret Marion, but it makes a kind of sense, this idea of ontological reduction as a step towards donation. I think you can develop it from Heidegger in that direction. And then we have Akaki again. I mean, in our own independent work, writings, etc. You know, we always used to say, I will only do my thing. Anything else should adapt itself to the job done. You have to be careful with Heidegger and his apodictic statements, I think, often. I think you should do your work, basically, as you think it should be done, and do it in an independent way and stay true to your own convictions. But that doesn't exclude the possibility of asking yourself, as another part of your job, how can I make it more understandable or available? That's one of the reasons I'm playing around with these formats of trying to do with limited success, I must admit, because of my technical inabilities, doing a live stream on Heidegger. It's just, in a way, I'm basically what I'm interested in. It's not so much in promoting my thought about Heidegger or my interpretation of Heidegger. And I think it's, for me, it's about creating free spaces. So I like to create a free and safe space. It's something I did 20 years ago when I started giving seminars in Meßkirch. And we always had a mixed audience of people, older people, younger people, students of philosophy, retired doctors or lawyers, whatever, simple people from Meßkirch. And of course, it's difficult to deal with a very with a group that's so made up of such very different people. But at the same time, we always found a way of talking with each other, and it's. I think that is what it is about. When I do a reading seminar or I do some of these lecture courses, it's still basically meant to be a way to help people find their own understanding of Heidegger. I think that's the most important thing, and that's the thing you can take away from lectures or lecture courses, webinars, whatever. And it often may be just one sentence. It's just one thing somebody says, what I like to call clicks with you. Say, yes, that's something I can think about, or I want to think more about, or that helps me understand myself better, or my own problems sometimes. So that's basically it. And Louise is asking another one. Do you think that listening to Heidegger speak, as in the documentary, allows a different understanding than reading Heidegger? There is I think it can help, but you have to be very careful. On the one hand, Heidegger is aware of the fact that he's speaking on television, so to an audience with little or no understanding of philosophy. So he will adapt his language to it. I think that's an example of Heidegger adapting his presentation of the essence of his thinking. So he's not going to make it more simple, but in a way he's allowing people, presenting it in such a way that allows people to get some idea of what he's talking about. And another example is the famous Gelassenheit lecture he gave in Meßkirch, where he was talking to his town people. And of course, he knew that most people in Meßkirch never read a book of philosophy. So you have to find a way of presenting your thinking in a way that they can understand. Otherwise, you get this feeling that people often had in Meßkirch when there was a conference of the Heidegger-Gesellschaft. They were talking over their heads, basically. But I think maybe it's Jörg Heidegger, his son, who was driving his father in the 50s and 60s to many of these lectures he gave, said, when I was in the audience and I was listening to my father speaking, I could understand everything. But later, when he would get a copy of the published text and he tried to read it, he couldn't understand it. So I think that there is something in Heidegger's way of pronouncing, speaking, that is like taking you by the hand on a path of thinking and pointing out, let's say, the beauty you see in the forest and take you to a clearing. So there's variety where it may help. And it's people sometimes say, if I'm reading Heidegger aloud, it makes a difference in their understanding. It's not to bang on my own drum, whatever you call it, but I think it can help. And of course, poetry is always basically written to be spoken out loud. And if you have, I know a woman who does these declamations, and if she's doing a poem by Rilke or Hölderlin, it gains something which the written word doesn't have. So, and you can try it. And if you think, well, if I look at this movie and I see Heidegger talking, and it helps me, then it's all right. And if you say, well, I prefer reading Heidegger, if also people who are more into hearing and others who are more into reading. So that's this one. Let's see. Francisco Parra is saying there was a post this week quoting Fink, I believe, and the magic of his words. So I think Heidegger sometimes if thinking and poetizing are neighbors or neighborly trunks of trees, they are related. And Heidegger, we have this volume which is 81, I think, Gedachtes. So there, I think, is there's an attempt by Heidegger to try different kind of reading than you find in normal philosophical texts. He calls them often Winke, hints, and it's the same idea. It's basically a formal indication pointing to something that you can actualize in your own existence, and thus get to an understanding of it. And displaying with language, I think there are passages in Heidegger that are almost poetical. So there is magic in his words, and there is a magic. He had a magic or charisma as a teacher. Otherwise, it doesn't explain how so many pretty brilliant people all came to study with Heidegger. As we know, there's a long list. Starts with Carl Leeuwit, and it goes on through Hannah Arendt and Jonas, all the way up to Tugendhat, for example. Let's see. Dawson is asking, are you familiar with the Phenomenology Association of Japan? Do you think there's still much to learn from certain readings of Heidegger, as in the work of Nishida and Nishitani? I'm not too familiar with the Phenomenology Association of Japan. I know, for example, it's interesting that it was Hartmut Buchner, who set it up, because he studied in Japan and spoke Japanese, and was also a student of Heidegger in the 50s. They organized an annual meeting of the translators of Heidegger into Japanese, and they come together for 2 days, and they discuss translations and the problems of translation. At the same time, there are presentations. So it's something that is unique, I think, to Japan. It doesn't happen in any other country in such a systematic way and for such a long time already. And then, of course, they're trying to translate the whole Gesamtausgabe. Of course, there's always to learn from readings of Heidegger by Nishida or Nishitani. I think that's... but there also you have the problem of translation, because it's that's another question. Well, Richard Shoemaker has another question. I will try to answer that one first, and then go on to the next one. A little bit. Could you talk to us a little bit about the biographical dimension of working on Heidegger? How important is this for you? Well, I think there are several ways of looking at it. Of course, people like to quote Heidegger's statement in one of his Aristotle lecture courses, where he says he was born, he did his work, and he died. And that was all. That was all he said about it. But even then, if Aristotle was born in Greece or in Macedonia in a certain time, then already you have a context, an historical context. So I think in Heidegger's case, because you could say the starting point of his philosophy is his own facticity. So he's trying, that's the double movement that is in his understanding of life. Life is a general concept, which is basically, as he will later see, too broad to function properly. At the same time, life is always my life of a person, in the case of human beings. You could say it's the same with Dasein. You have the general Dasein, the universal structure, which is only there actualized in individuated Dasein. And this. So in Heidegger's case, you could say he starts his search, his philosophical odyssey, as a young man who was born in Meßkirch in 1889, when Germany was still an empire, and who came from a Catholic family and was brought up with the Catholic faith, who went to school, etc., etc. So I think Heidegger. So I think for Heidegger, philosophy and life are not separated; they are connected. I think if you look at Heidegger's thinking, understanding his life and the things he had to deal with will make it more. Can be a contribution to better understanding his thinking. So I think it's an important part, and of course, in the early 1930s and the whole question of National Socialism, it becomes to play an important role. I think Heidegger is trying to make his existence as a philosopher transparent, and the only way to do that is by making philosophy transparent. So these two trajectories on his path of thinking or path of life are intertwined. That's why I keep digging away at his biography and often also letters that can provide you information that can help you understand the text better. I'll try to move on because questions keep coming in. Stille Stimme, the silent voice, asks me, all technology would have been Haken and Pflegen, caring and maintaining, instead of challenging. Romanticism. The Greeks didn't build a temple without quarry. No, I think it's a bit of a misunderstanding. I wouldn't call it old technology, Hege and Pflege. It means that basically, nature that's been geheekt and gepflegt, or is determining the way we go about nature. So you try to give plants the possibility of growing correctly, and you can use modern technology as well for doing that. And it's the opposite of this notion of challenging nature, turning it into this what Heidegger calls this Bestand, this enormous gas station. And some of the things we are confronted with today, with the war in the Ukraine, that we just look at the earth and living beings as something we can use for our own purposes. So I don't think in Heidegger's case it's so much romanticism. And of course, the Greeks didn't build. We can't live without technology, Heidegger would say. And he always repeats, I'm not against technology. There's a danger in technology if this technological calculating way of approaching being is the only one that remains. Then we lose a whole lot of the world and of ourselves. And it's basically this notion of that everything is makeable. We want ourselves to be makeable. If we don't like something about ourselves, whether it's physically or psychologically, we want to go to someone who can fix it. And we just, there are no limits in that sense. Well, if Heidegger, that's a question, I think it's Maas again, is using Herbert Verner or Vermeer, doesn't matter. If Heidegger were alive now, do you think he would make himself available for such interactions, presentations as this? I think he would. Basically, if you look at what he did, he recorded records. So he went to a studio to record the text of one of his lectures. Or he read poems by Hölderlin that were recorded. He also talked on the radio and did presentations that were broadcast live. He did television. So if you look at the modern ways of communicating, the possibilities, he was using them. I think if he would have adapted also to the internet, and he might have been doing a conference on Zoom. Often it depends on, like with Hermann Heidegger, if you can make a convincing case. So, well, this is the big advantage. I think one of the things I like about Zoom or this is that you can talk to people from all over the world, and it doesn't cost a thing, basically. So it also gives you more freedom, because everything you do, you can just drop it, and if it doesn't work, and start doing something else. So let's see. Dawson, yeah, of course, the first translation of Being and Time was in Japanese, and it's also the first translation of Heidegger was What is Metaphysics, and it was also into Japanese. But the Japanese were already in Freiburg to study with Husserl and Heidegger in the early 20s. So now we go to Rob Crimmins. We have access to Heidegger's lectures on the pre-Socratic philosophers to inform us about Greek thinking. Does Heidegger ever discuss ancient Greek theology in a direct way? That depends on what you call a direct way. As he gets older, you find a little bit more about Homer, for example. So he pays far less attention to it, of course, than to thinking. There is a little bit on Hesiod and Homer, if you look for it, but it's not really on the same level as his interpretation of Greek thinking. So let's see. Who or what was Heidegger's greatest nemesis, is Gisli asking. Biggest challenger or adversary, person, place, or thing, or time? Of course, it would be kind of fun to say it was Heidegger himself. He was basically his own greatest nemesis and his greatest adversary. And another one, this is famous quote. It's been reported that Heidegger said that Nietzsche had destroyed him. Er hat mich kaputt gemacht. So Nietzsche, maybe I think in a philosophical sense, remains Plato, Aristotle, Kant, Hegel, and Nietzsche. They're the persons that, or the philosophers he had the biggest auseinandersetzung with. Of course, in this famous letter to Jaspers, he talks about the two two arrows in his life. One is the confrontation with the religion of his provenance. I was looking for the English word. And the other one was the rectorship. So I think National Socialism would be a candidate as well, both as maybe the biggest challenge. So Heidegger, when he was confronted with the rise of National Socialism, he was questioning his own position as a philosopher or a university teacher and what he needed to do. So, but it's a very long story that I won't get into now. Are there any serious studies in Heidegger? I think, well, I think that's changed a lot, basically due to the fact that Heidegger has disappeared so much from the academic scene in Germany. Go back to von Hermann, he would have at least 6-7 doctoral students attending his seminars and some postgrads, and maybe 2 or 3 were working on a habilitation. So there was a kind of a center for Heidegger studies. If you wanted to learn about Heidegger, you would go to Freiburg, because you not only had von Hermann there, but also Eugen Fink, you had Rainer Martin, Ute Guzzoni, etc. So there were several people who had very different interpretations of Heidegger, where you could go to and learn a lot from. Then we have Ricky Phillips. What letters from Heidegger are able to show how he dealt with intense struggles in his personal life? Well, there are quite a lot. Of course, you have the publication of the letters to his wife, where some of this stuff comes up. You'll also find, especially for the time that he was getting married with Elfriede Page, who was a Protestant woman, in the letters to his parents and his sister. And there's, of course, they are very revealing, and you can, I think, in the letters to Jaspers, or the correspondence with Jaspers and Leuwit, there's a lot as well. In some of the others, there's less, because the relationship was different. Silent voice again. Thus, the essence of modern technology is historically not an unprecedented phenomenon. Though, if it's the essence of modern technology, is of course, I would say, as old as the idea of technology. So, and Heidegger would say that the essence of technology is nothing technical. Like, it's the same as the essence of physics is nothing physical. So it's basically and Heidegger also sees, if you see technology not only as technology, but also when you go back to the Greek understanding of it as poiesis, then it's related to art. That's why Heidegger also thought that maybe the solution, or the opening of a new world, to put it that way, could come from art. That also explains why in his later life he was getting more and more interested in also in meeting personally famous artists. Of course, Chirida comes to mind immediately, because it's the only book that Heidegger wrote together with another person, Die Kunst und der Raum. The problem is that nowadays you can't see it anymore, because there was a limited edition of about 150, 200 books. But in these books, there were the original lithos by Chirida. You can't, but you can buy them. Sometimes they're still available on eBay or something, but they're incredibly expensive. So nowadays you only have the text of Heidegger, no longer the lithos that Chirida did for them. Other people are Wiemer, Dix, Heiliger, Georges Braque, René Char, Hans Kok. So Heidegger was very much interested in art, and it's remarkable that he was portrayed by the best sculptors of his time, basically, but not by painters. It would be an interesting exhibition if we would bring together all the different portraits of Heidegger that were done by some of these great sculptors in one place. So then we go to Francisco again. Did you know Jean Beauvais? What was his opinion about Letter on Humanism and Heidegger's? I didn't know Jean Beauvais personally. I'm not sure I understand the question. His opinion about Letter on Humanism. No, I think for one, they agreed that it should be published. So it was first published in French. and only later in German, in Switzerland, because Heidegger couldn't publish in Germany at the time, at the interdiction. So, of course, later Beaufret and Heidegger were friends. So still waiting for the publication of their correspondence, but there's some, I think about 250 letters in total. Then Wilson thinks that was a great question, and he was curious to know how Beaufret and René Char played a role in Heidegger's later life and his visits to France. Well, of course, Beaufret was very important. Heidegger always went together with Beaufret on these trips to France. The first time he went to France was to go to Cirey-la-Salle to be a part of the Decade that was organized there since several years. And the basic idea was to have a culture exchange between Germany and France. So when Heidegger was invited there, Beaufret went with him, and they visited Paris, where he met Jacques Lacan. And they went on to the Normandy, where he met Georges Braque in Varensville. And then they wrote down in Normandy to Cirey-la-Salle. And he did this seminar, and he did the famous lecture, Was ist das, die Philosophie? What is philosophy? And in attendance were people like, what's his name again? Well, the whole lot of the fin de fleur of French philosophy was there. Sometimes I can't bring names to my mind, but you can look it up. And then they invited Heidegger to come to the Provence. And there he met René Char, and he and Heidegger became friends. There's also a letter exchange between them. So every time when Heidegger was going to Le Tour, he would, for his seminars, he would also visit René Char. And Beaufret was the driving force behind the organization of these seminars. And for Heidegger, it was the first time he saw the Mediterranean Sea. So he got the difference of light between the Black Forest or Meßkirch and Provence is something that he noticed, of course. It's also a reason why so many painters went down there. Next one is Nikolai Moffel-Oberst. So you see the possibility of a renaissance of Heidegger studies in Germany in the near future, possibly as a Heidegger chair at the University of Freiburg? No, I don't see. I think it will be more and more difficult to have a really interesting Heidegger studies in Germany, because there are so few professors left that really have Heidegger as one of the main areas of their research, that I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. And we're still dealing with the backlash of the publication of the Black Notebooks. And that's one of the differences also with the Farias controversy in the late 1980s. If you want to read about it, you have to go to the library and work with microfiche to find the articles that were published in national newspapers. Nowadays, you just Google, and the first thing you find about Heidegger is still all the problematic of the Black Notebooks, related to National Socialism, etc., etc. So I think it's not looking very bright. I think there's more a chance of Heidegger studies they're under pressure in most countries, I think. But in Spain, Latin America, the situation is much better than in Germany still. So I'm not so optimistic about that. And of course, the professors no longer have the freedom to teach what they want. They're all bound by the curriculum. I know so you don't. It's very hard to integrate, let's say, a continuous Heidegger program for any professor. Well, Akagi industry says in this respect that maybe Paola Coriando in Innsbruck might be somebody who, either for a Heidegger chair of philosophy. I don't think there will be another one. And I think that's, I don't think she, to be honest, she's good enough for such a position. And she seems to be more enjoying skydiving and things like that at the moment. Another question is, did Heidegger ever want to visit the States to lecture? Well, of course, there was some talk about trying to bring Heidegger to America to do some lectures, but that plan fell through in the end. There was also talk of Heidegger going to Argentina, which he considered also for a while, but he never left Europe. He was not like Gadamer, who went to the US many times and to the Far East. He flew all over the world. But that's it didn't happen. Next question is are the Germans overly politically correct, especially when it comes to Heidegger? Well, it's not just the Germans, I think. It's the two ways of looking at things. It's also a part of the woke movement nowadays. I believe that you should understand people in the context of their own time. And that's one of the reasons that the biography of Heidegger is also important, I think. If you think about National Socialism in 1932 or 1933, it's something very different from what we think nowadays that National Socialism is, because it's there was a lot that was still uncertain and nobody knew exactly how it was going to play out. And of course, the first thing we now think of is Auschwitz and the Holocaust. So how can anybody ever have any interest or see anything positive in National Socialism if you have that image immediately? But in 1932, 33, it didn't exist. So I think that's a reason to try to come to an understanding of Heidegger's political involvement from there, and not just to use our own. I think you shouldn't judge historical times with the standards of our own time. I think it's not just Heidegger, it's the same with the founding fathers of America. They owned slaves. And at the same time, they talk about the freedom of man. And of course, black men were not included in their idea of what human beings are, probably. And I think every time has its own blindness, and that's why it's important to try and understand history. And I think it makes more sense if you have problems with Heidegger, this is someone like Gröber, the Archbishop of Freiburg at the time, that you have a discussion about it and say, well, what did he do? What did he say? What is problematic about it? How do we look at it nowadays? How can we understand it in his own time? I think, and then just to say we have the things we don't like about our history, we just cut out. We take away all the statues, we take away all the you can't mention the name anymore. Then you can never learn anything from it. Then you get a kind of, I don't know what it becomes, a politically correct understanding of history, where all of course, if you look at Kant, the statements Kant makes about women, or black people, or things like that. Nowadays we don't accept it, but Kant was living in the 18th century, and things were very different than they are today. So it is also, I think there the internet also plays a role, because everybody has this negative image of Heidegger. So if you Google Heidegger, and I can very well understand if you're going to support something financially, that you rather than support the local orchestra than a Heidegger conference. You don't want to have your name associated with Heidegger in that sense. I think but it's a topic we can talk about for a long time. Next question is: disciplines apart from philosophy accept Heidegger's phenomenology as valued research method and its merit. Is there discrimination in job market when people have used his methods? Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. That would also depend on the country you're talking about. I think the phenomenology is a method, so it's a how of doing research. It's not so much of what, which makes it adaptable. So you don't. I don't know. I think nowadays, if you're a student and you would ask your professor, should I do a dissertation on Heidegger, the professor would probably advise you not to do it if you want to have a job later. In Germany, for sure. Maybe in the US as well, although there may be some places left where it's different. Oh, what's the time? It's we almost need to wrap it up a little bit. If there is no question now. Yes, I agree. Doss says the consequence will be ahistorical attitudes, which limit what is known about the past. I think we have an imperative to know every moment of history, regardless of how tragic or unpleasant. I agree with you. It's amazing that, for example, in the US, Anne Frank's diary is forbidden at schools. That's another comment is it's ironic that the historical look back at history is a self-righteous blindness that conveniently overlooks the sickness of our own times. Yeah, I think for Heidegger, a critique of the past is basically always a critique of the present. So we should not hold the past up to our standards, but look at the past and see how we do in comparison with our own standard. So, of course, it's. I think in the 1930s, black and white people couldn't ride on the same, couldn't sit next to each other on a bus. So, I think the racism, the anti-Semitism didn't disappear since 1945. Unfortunately, it would have been better if it did, but it seems to be pretty much alive. Well, maybe I'll wrap this up by saying a few things about 2 webinars I'm planning to start in October. The first one is a pretty long one, 21 sessions. It's what I call I still have a question from Keith. Today, where do we find being historical thinking being done, if it is? Well, we try to do it a little bit in our webinar on the contributions of philosophy, trying to develop being historical thinking. But being historical thinking is also not an end in itself. in my opinion, it's a way of trying to move beyond metaphysics and to develop a thinking that's non-metaphysical. And of course, I think it's because it's still too tied to metaphysics. Heidegger gives it up later, and he starts doing something else again. So that's how I see it. But it's one of the problems, I think. There's one path of thinking of Heidegger. This path of thinking has many different tracks. So, and it's completely natural, and don't begrudge anyone to pick his own Heidegger. And that's what you see people doing most of the time. A lot of people will say, well, Heidegger of Being and Time, that's Heidegger, and that's the one I want to study. Everything that comes after is a bit of nonsense, romanticism, irrationalism even. You have also people say, no, I like the later Heidegger, and he's trying to develop this notion of building, dwelling, and thinking, and Being and Time is too metaphysical for me. I only want to deal with the later Heidegger. Everybody should do it, but I think it's also important that every now and then there's someone who tries to give an overview of the whole path of thinking with all its different tracks and Holtzwege and Ierwege. So, but back to this webinar, I've called it a study guide to Being in Time, and the idea is to go through the first half of Being in Time in the form of kind of a commentary. So in the first hour of the 2 hours, I would like to give a short commentary on a couple of paragraphs and pick out what I think are the main issues in it, or in them, and try to explain them a little bit better, maybe, or give some help for studying it yourself. The second hour would then be dedicated to questions and reading some sections that we pick out with the people participating. So you will get my text about the paragraphs before we deal with the paragraphs. So you can read my text first, and then you can also ask questions about my view or interpretation. And at the same time, you can bring up problems and questions that you may have yourself, or say, I would like very much to focus on this passage, or a couple of sentences where I think I don't get it, or I think that's the most essential part. So I've tried to do it as a reading seminar, I'm still doing it as a reading seminar in German. The disadvantage is that it takes very, 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 very long. And the other way of just doing a presentation, it goes a bit against my own understanding of how to bring Heidegger closer in the form of webinars and things like that. So I'd like to do it. If it works out well, then at the end of the course, we have a small studying guide to Being in Time, which will have probably 100, 150 pages. And so I will be putting up more info on it in the coming week, probably. And the other one is once more Heidegger National Socialism, but this time it will be 10 lectures. So I did one where we also did reading sessions, but I think it might be in this case more interesting to try and give my own interpretation of the whole complexity and the roots you can find in early Heidegger that come out in the 1930s, and how it develops further, and also look at all the different texts we have and the problematic passages in the black notebooks or in some of the lecture courses or in letters, etc., etc. And then it will be more or less my own story, but of course there will be plenty of time to discuss it and listen to other opinions. Alberto is asking at this point, do you already know in what day of the week the webinar Being in Time will occur? Yes, it will be on the Monday. This Monday we'll finish the archaeology of being in time, so it's kind of nice then to continue with a studying guide to being in time. So it will be on the Monday. What's the time? 1950. Yes, I hope it's a good idea, Alberto. We'll see. If you like, we can move over to Zoom in a bit. Does everybody have the link for Zoom? I posted it somewhere. I think. Let's see if it's here. Where's the Zoom? Or I can look if I find it here. Zoom. Yes, I need to post it again. Where did they keep it? Oh, I know where I can find it. Stupid me. Sometimes if you're too busy doing one thing, here it is. There it comes. Just 1 second. Be patient a little bit longer, and then here it is. Yeah. So if you want to watch the movie, it's in German, but we have English subtitles thanks to Louise. You should move to Zoom, and then I will close this live streaming. I need to practice it more, but as time goes on, we'll try to make it to get rid of all the technical problems, and we'll see where it goes. So thanks again for attending and for your patience while we sorted out the problem. We'll do it again next month, probably. I'll let you know when. And we'll see. Or maybe I'll see you in Zoom, and otherwise I will see you soon again. End of September, we do the Heidegger conference on Zoom as well. So the program will be available next week. And if you would like to present something, I can still include you in the program, 1 or 2 people. So, but you need to hurry. Otherwise, I hope to see you then. We have some interesting presentation. We have 3 main speakers, Richard Capobianco, Ian Thompson, and Suzanne Claxton. But we have some 14, 15 papers as well from different people in different languages also. So this is it for tonight. I'll end the stream and I'll open up my Zoom. I can't do it at the same time. So see you maybe, and enjoy the rest of the Saturday and the Sunday, and have a nice week, everybody. Goodbye.